They say the dead do not return, yet in the summer of 1897, in a quiet Virginian town, two children began speaking in voices that were not their own. They described graves no one admitted existed, and lives they could never have lived. The screen flickers with a grainy photograph. Two little girls, identical, standing hand in hand before a church that no longer exists. Their eyes seem to lock with the viewer, cold, knowing, impossibly aware. Above the photograph, written in faded ink, "They came back to us." The camera lingers on their faces, unblinking. The silence stretches too long, and then, a whisper not belonging to either child, "We were never meant to leave." By the late 19th century, America was a country choking on its own secrets. Wars had been fought, blood spilled, fortunes made on unmarked graves, and still the nation dared to call itself righteous. In the heart of Rutherford, Virginia, a town now erased from most maps, one family's tragedy would become a wound too deep to close. The Wexlers were an ordinary family of the time. Elias, a merchant tied to the local church. Margaret, a mother of four. But their daughters, twins Anne and Lillian, aged 6, died in 1895 in what town records list simply as a carriage mishap. The funeral was swift. No gravestone, no procession, only whispers. By dawn the next day, the church decreed silence, and silence became law in Rutherford. But 2 years later, Margaret gave birth once more, again to twins. Again identical from their earliest days, the new twins unsettled the town. The midwife, Abigail Rhodes, would later write in her journal, "They looked at me with women's eyes, not infants' eyes, as though they had seen me die before it had happened." At 3 years old, the girls began to speak of places they could not know. They guided their parents to a toy chest in the Wexler attic, describing its contents in exacting detail, though those toys had been burned after the first twins' deaths. One sister whispered to the other in the dead of night, using words no child should know, in dialects belonging to the old immigrants who had settled Rutherford in the 1820s. The more they spoke, the less Elias and Margaret could deny. The girls were not simply children, they were returning. The church of St. Eustace, Rutherford's only parish, moved quickly. Its records note the baptism of the second set of twins, but all subsequent pages were torn out. The priest at the time, Father Malachi Burns, ordered that no mention of duplicated lives was to be made from the pulpit, nor written in diaries, nor acknowledged in conversation. Yet his sermons grew darker. Surviving fragments of his letters reveal his private fear. They are not reborn, they are reclaimed. This is not God's work. It is the soil beneath Rutherford demanding its due. By 1901, the Wexlers were ostracized. Rumors spread that Margaret had made a covenant with old forces to bring her children back. Women crossed themselves when she walked through the market. Elias' business collapsed. The family became pariahs, living under the shadow of their own daughters. Children in Rutherford would sing a rhyme when the twins passed. "Two who died, two returned. Fire can't kill what the soil has learned." The rhyme was said to have no author. It simply appeared in the schoolyard one morning. The Wexler twins, who by then answered not to their given names but to Anne and Lillian, began to speak openly of their previous deaths. They pointed to the corner of Main and Dalton, insisting that was where the carriage struck them. They described the bruises, the broken teeth, the cold earth above them. Parents forbade their children from playing with them. Shopkeepers refused them entry, but the girls kept growing, and with each year their memories grew more precise. By the time they were 7, they told their mother something she never admitted aloud. "We weren't buried in the churchyard. We were buried beneath the school." In 1904, workers repairing the foundation of Rutherford's only schoolhouse discovered something that should never have been there. Beneath the floorboards of the unused basement room lay 2 small wooden boxes, child-sized. No records documented their existence. No burial permits had been filed, but the dimensions left no doubt. They were coffins. When the Wexler twins heard whispers of the discovery, they began screaming uncontrollably, not like frightened children, but like trapped, suffocating victims reliving their final breath. One clawed at her throat until she drew blood. The other sobbed, repeating, "We told you where they put us. Why didn't you believe us?" The workers who unearthed the boxes were ordered by Father Burns to rebury them outside of town limits without inspection. To open them, the priest warned, would invite the curse. The townsfolk obeyed, but the fear did not leave Rutherford. It grew roots. Not all of the church's secrets stayed buried. In 1911, long after the Wexler twins had reached adolescence, a hidden ledger was found inside the parish vestry wall. It contained a list of displacements of individuals who had been relocated after death, their bodies hidden to protect the church's reputation or to conceal scandal. Among the names, Anne Wexler, Lillian Wexler, but the ledger listed not 2 children, 73 souls. Some were enslaved people denied Christian burials. Others were stillborn infants. A few were simply noted as unbaptized. The implication was chilling. Rutherford was not just haunted by 2 girls. It was haunted by generations deliberately concealed beneath its most sacred spaces. By 1912, Anne and Lillian, the second set, were 15 years old, and they had become terrifying in their certainty. Witnesses wrote of the girls pointing at elderly townsfolk and reciting details of their youthful sins, affairs, thefts, even hidden acts of violence. They spoke with the cadence of old voices, channeling not only their dead selves, but echoes of others beneath the soil. One account describes Anne confronting Father Burns directly in the middle of Sunday Mass. "You think the church protects you. It protects no one. We heard the infants crying in the dark. We heard the prayers never answered, and we remember it all." The congregation fled the church in silence. Some claimed the candles extinguished themselves. Others swore the girls' shadows stretched unnaturally long, as though tethered to something beneath the earth. The Wexlers themselves began to fracture. Elias, once a respected merchant, withdrew into paranoia, insisting that the twins were possessed vessels. He tried to arrange an exorcism, but Margaret would not allow it. "They are my children," she cried, "whether they are living or dead." Margaret herself deteriorated into obsession, keeping diaries filled with conflicting entries, some written in her hand, others in an unrecognizable script. Scholars who later examined them claimed the handwriting matched that of her firstborn daughters, dead nearly 2 decades by that time. Neighbors reported seeing light in the Wexler windows at impossible hours, long shadows pacing the rooms, children's voices layered over adult tones, as though a congregation were gathering inside. Rutherford was no longer a town. It was a mausoleum pretending to live. In the winter of 1913, Father Malachi Burns vanished. His rectory was found abandoned, the walls daubed with ash markings resembling inverted crosses and circles of interlocking rings. No sign of struggle, no farewell, only absence. But in the Wexler home, Margaret claimed the twins had delivered a message the night before his disappearance. "He will not sleep in holy ground. He will sleep where we slept." Weeks later, hunters discovered a shallow grave in the woods, not far from the site where the school coffins had once been unearthed. The body was badly decomposed, but the vestments left no doubt. It was Burns. His eyes had been sewn shut. The church declared it an act of violence by vagrants, but the town whispered something different. The twins had chosen his grave. By 1916, the Wexler twins had become young women. Their beauty was striking, but their presence unsettled anyone who met their gaze. It was as though they carried not just their own youth, but the gaze of the long, dead looking through their eyes. Suitors came, drawn by appearance but repelled by presence. The girls spoke of their deaths with unflinching detail, recounting how the carriage wheels crushed bone, how the dirt filled their mouths. No man could remain in their company without breaking into a cold sweat. Margaret insisted they were blessed, chosen to reveal the truth of souls. Elias whispered a darker conviction, that the twins were cursed vessels, bound to the sins Rutherford had buried. And yet, even as they grew, they never stopped answering to Anne and Lillian, the names of the first children. The living carried the dead, and the dead spoke through the living. The town itself began to rot. The coal vein that once sustained Rutherford dried up, forcing families to abandon their homes. The church roof collapsed in a storm never repaired. Fields flooded without explanation, crops drowned under black water that smelled of sulfur. But what most unnerved the remaining residents was the sound. At night, through the fog, people reported hearing the cries of children, echoing from beneath the schoolhouse, the churchyard, even the foundations of their own homes. 73 voices, one survivor later wrote. 73 voices that never rested. The more the town decayed, the more the twins seemed to thrive. their skin pale but unwrinkled, their laughter sharp as bells. They were not aging like others. They were something else. In 1918, Sheriff Abram Hollow filed what would be Rutherford's last surviving official record. He reported that 5 townsfolk had vanished in the span of 3 months, 2 women, 3 men. No bodies found, no tracks leading away. The only evidence, strange markings in ash left near the schoolhouse foundation. Harlow confronted the Wexler twins, demanding to know if they had knowledge of the disappearances. Witnesses claim one of the sisters answered calmly, "Not gone, taken back. The soil wants balance." Harlow fled town 2 nights later, abandoning his badge on the church altar. His journal, discovered years afterward, ended with a single line written in frantic script: "They do not belong to time." Margaret Wexler, worn by grief and madness, wrote her final confession in 1920. She admitted that after the death of her first daughters, she begged God for their return, but the silence was unbearable. So she turned not to God, but to the church basement, where Father Burns had once shown her the hidden bones of the unbaptized. There, she said, she prayed not to heaven but to the soil itself, and the soil answered. Her journal ends with words almost illegible in their shaking scrawl. "They came back, yes, but they are not mine. They belong to what I called, and it will take more until it has enough." Within weeks of writing it, Margaret vanished. Her body was never found. By 1923, Rutherford was nearly gone. Homes stood abandoned, shutters banging in the wind. The school closed, the church was boarded up. The few who remained lived in fear, whispering that the ground itself was poisoned. The Wexler twins, now women in their mid-20s, were last seen standing at the edge of town, staring toward the abandoned schoolyard. Their dresses were white. Their hands were clasped. When the last family fled Rutherford that winter, they swore they saw the twins watching from an upstairs window of the Wexler home. The glass reflected no lantern, no firelight, only 2 pale faces, still and waiting. After that, the town was left to the crows. No one returned, and the name Rutherford was erased from maps. But the legend of the returning twins lived on. For nearly 2 decades, Rutherford lay abandoned. Maps no longer marked its boundaries, and train routes curved around the overgrown valley as though avoiding a wound. But in 1937, during the Great Depression, surveyors working for a new road project stumbled upon the ruins. What they found should have been a ghost town: empty homes, collapsed roofs, trees growing through floorboards. And yet some houses still bore signs of life: curtains drawn, dishes on tables, children's shoes by doors. Most disturbing was the Wexler residence. Though it had stood empty for 14 years, a lamp still sat in the window, its glass unbroken, as if waiting to be lit. The surveyors reported hearing laughter inside, though no one was there. They did not return the next day. The rediscovery of Rutherford stirred something sleeping beneath it. Workers and travelers passing near the ruins began reporting strange dreams: children crying, earth pressing down on their chests, teeth breaking under stone wheels. A local historian, Elias Crane, recorded interviews with those who dared to enter. One man claimed that inside the schoolhouse he heard 73 voices chanting in unison. Another described seeing 2 women at the top of the hill, hand in hand, watching silently. When he shouted, they turned their heads together, perfectly synchronized, and vanished. Crane's final entry, dated October 12, 1938, reads, "They are not 2, they are many. They are the mouth through which the soil remembers." He was never seen again. In 1941, the federal government dispatched a small team to catalog abandoned settlements across Virginia. Rutherford was on their list. The team entered the Wexler house first. Their notes describe a staircase leading to the basement, though no such construction should have existed. The air was heavy, suffocating. The walls were covered in writing, names, hundreds of names, some crossed out, others repeated in jagged script. At the center of the basement stood 2 child-sized coffins, open and empty. The investigator's report ends abruptly. The last line, written in a trembling hand, reads, "They are behind us." The files were sealed, stamped classified. By the end of World War II, Rutherford had once again faded into silence. No official records mention the Wexlers after 1923. No graves were ever marked, no descendants traced, but travelers still told stories of seeing two women walking the roads at dusk, their white dresses unstained despite the mud, their eyes too old for their faces. They asked for directions to Rutherford, though no such place appeared on any map. Those who helped them sometimes vanished days later. Their homes, when searched, contained only one clue: pairs of children's shoes left neatly by the door. Today, Rutherford is nothing but wilderness. No church, no schoolhouse, no Wexler home. The valley swallowed it all. Yet locals whisper that if you walk the woods at night, you may hear the sound of carriage wheels splintering wood, followed by the screams of children buried alive. The legend insists that Anne and Lillian, the second twins, never died. They walk still, carrying not only their own memories but those of the countless silenced dead. They are the soil's testimony, the reckoning no one wished to face. And perhaps that is why the case was never studied, why the files were sealed, why the story was left to rot in silence, because if it is true, then death is not an ending, it is only a door, fade to black. A whisper layered with many voices: "We told you where they put us. Why didn't you believe us?"